papers. So what is clinical paper? And just orate yourself, just so that I just wanted to start off my session today with the smile. Okay. So please, somebody tell what is a clinical paper means. Anybody? Do you want me to pick someone in the group?
It's a scientific publication where it's been critically peer reviewed or well controlled so that it's good quality.
Where is the renal list?
Yeah.
Please, Mr. Hunter.
Sorry, Kamal, I'm going to mute you for a second. Is that okay? Is that okay, Kamal? I'm going to mute you for a minute because there is a voice there. So, right. So today's aim, yes, I agree that any scientific writing published in a journal is a clinical paper, basically, any scientific writing. So especially, it could be humans, it could be animals, it could be anything, you see. So even experimental studies. So today's aim is to make you understand what are the types of clinical papers. There are many types of clinical papers. So I said scientific, it could be anything from lab to technical aspects of medicine. It could be non-clinical also paper, isn't it? Clinical, non-clinical, and technical, and anything related to medicine and around the medical subjects. So today I'm trying to make all of you understand that there is a classification, international classification on types of clinical papers. And also I would like you to understand that there is a level of evidence. For example, a certain level is called high quality evidence, certain level is called low quality evidence. And also, depending on the level of evidence, we will take the results of the clinical paper into practice. So this will also help you to do a critical appraisal, and also will help you to assign an appropriate level of evidence for a clinical paper if you are asked to do a critical appraisal. This is my aim of today's presentation. So the learning outcomes are classification of clinical. You will definitely know by end of this lecture, you'll all be able to classify any clinical paper given to you in your hand, to know which type of clinical paper it is, and you can assign the level of evidence as well, just by looking at the abstract itself. And also you can start doing critical appraisal as we go along. So this is like introduction to critical appraisal. So, and also, if you want to conduct a literature search, it will help you which type of clinical papers you can pull, which type of clinical papers you can't pull. So this is the whole idea of exploring this concept of classification of clinical papers and assigning level of evidence. And also for your research and for your thesis as well, it helps you to do a study designing for your studies, okay? So unless you know what type of clinical paper you're aiming at, so you can't design your study. So it's like you predetermine your research. So that's what it's all about. So that's why, when you all build, when somebody wants to build a new house, so we all ask the architect to give a design, isn't it? So that's why when somebody wants to write a clinical paper, we always ask, what kind of design do you want it? So you can ask from statistical expert, or you can ask from professor who is good in statistics, or you can ask any person who is good in statistics to design the study. What is meant by design, guys? So anybody in the group?
Planning.
Yes, Kamal, go ahead.
Planning.
Designing is planning. Like, so if you want to build a house, you have to plan, right? Like where the toilet should be, where the bathroom should be, where the hall, sitting hall and things like that. So exactly. So when you're writing a scientific paper, which is going to be there for lifetime, so for generations and generations and millennia, so you need to design your paper properly, isn't it? You need to design properly. So that's why, based on the design itself, the clinical papers are classified into observational studies and experimental and intervention studies. So Observational studies are two types, as I've written here: descriptive and analytic, which mean analytic studies. So most of the time in our clinical research as a clinicians, we come across descriptive studies and analytical studies. So we don't tend to get involved into experimental and intervention studies. Is that correct, guys? Unless you got funded by a private company or from a National Institute of Health Research. So, so what is the difference between observational studies and experimental or interventional studies? Is there any line where it'll stop us doing that? Come on, I think you're a senior person in the group. You can answer this, I'm sure.
Kamal Al-Mahbub, you mean?
Yeah, Kamal Al-Mahbub, yes. Because
I think experimental study usually done for a new treatment or a new type of medicine by pharmacological society. But observational studies is done in the medicine, like in the hospitals or in the university, something like this.
Yes. So the problem with, yes, you're right. So I agree. So most of the experimental and intervention studies are performed by pharmaceutical companies and other research big groups, which have got funds and permission from the government, permission from the research council. So observational studies, most of the time, they're not actually any like most of the time they're not harmful to the patients. Most of the time it's retrospective studies or maybe database analysis, so it doesn't actively involves patients most of the time. So whereas the experimental or intervention studies, it involves patients. So there comes the concept of ethics in research, because you're instituting some new drug or new treatment or new kind of procedure on a live patient, then comes the problem. So whether this is ethical or unethical, that's why based on the design, people have clearly made a point that yes, we need to decide these are observational studies, these are experimental studies. So observational studies mostly retrospective studies and mostly doesn't involve patients actively, and the experimental or intervention studies will involve patients, so we need ethics committee into action. And so this needs to go thoroughly through it, and it has to go through thoroughly with the board of ethics committee, and they should all have to look at the study protocol and approve the study protocol before you start any experiment or intervention. So that's why there is a clear demarcation between observational studies and experimental or intervention studies. So for your MSc, we're not going to go into experimental or intervention studies. Do you all agree with that? Or do you want to do experimental or intervention studies?
Oh.
Yes. So by the time, the timeline that takes to get ethics approval will be 3 to 6 months. Yeah. So, and you have to extend your contract for MSc for another year if you want to do experimental and intervention studies. So that's why we only tend to stick with observational studies.
Descriptive.
Observation studies are descriptive and analytical studies. So, okay, let's go to the next slide. So what are the descriptive studies? Common things. So I've written here case reports, case reports, longitudinal studies. So the case reports are the quite common things. As a beginner, you start writing case report. What is a case report? Can I pick someone in the group?
Is it just the analysis of just one case?
Is it Yusuf who is talking?
No, it's Vinay.
Vinay, yeah. So again, Vinay?
Is it just when you analyze just one clinical case? If you focus on one patient? Simply
one patient's report. Yeah. Yes. So I'll take in detail what kind of case report. Yes, I agree with you. So what's the next step? Is a case series. So what is a case series then?
Just multiple patients.
Multiple patients with the same condition or different condition?
Same, I'm assuming.
Same condition. Okay.
Yeah.
What is the cross-sectional studies means? Anybody in the group?
Yes.
Vinay is answering quite actively. So I want you to interact, because the more you interact, more you actually get to know. You take and you can learn. So what is the cross-sectional studies?
Is it when you look at a population at one point in time?
So cross-section at one point in time. So if you have if you look at a cake, like you have layers of ice cream and type of material, chocolate, and then the cream on the top and things like. If you cut a cake, so you can see the layers. So like that, if you go through a databases of any patient cohort or any group of population, you observe at that point, see how many had infection, how many had not, how many children had infection, how many adults have infection, how many of them recovered, how many of them actually carriers or something like that. If you look at one point in time, like a cross-sectional, like you look at all the layers of the cake, you look at all these types of population at a certain point of time. It's a cross-sectional study, or a cohort of people. Look at the cohort of the cohort. Cohort is a group, basically. Sorry, I'm introducing cohort now itself, but cross-sectional studies could be sometimes cohort, it could be in general population, or it could be in a database. Give me a minute. I'm going to log out of this and then log in again, and we can continue this session. Okay.
Okay.